Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be reviewing the books that I read in May. I read 10 books in the month and it was a mixture of adult fiction, YA, children's books. I'm going to start with the 4 adult fiction books that I read, kicking things off with Night Shift by Annie Crown. So this is a campus-based romance between a bookworm and a basketball player. So our main character, Kendall, is a big bookworm. She works at the library on Friday nights instead of going to college parties. She always has herself buried in a book and particularly loves romance novels. One night when she is doing her shift at the library, in walks the hot captain of the basketball team, who is reluctantly looking for a poetry recommendation for an assignment. There is a pretty instant spark between the pair, and the romance that follows is a mixture of cuteness, hotness, but quite a lot of miscommunication as well. This was a bit of a strange read because Kendall is a massive romance reader. So when they have things like miscommunication in the dynamic between the two of them, she almost like acknowledges it as a trope. Like she is viewing their whole romance through the lens of a romance reader, picking out like the elements of their dynamic and what tropes they would be if they were in a romance book, which is a little bit meta. And there is sort of this element of like, oh, we're not as perfect as it is in a romance novel, but we're real. There's kind of this vibe of like, this is not a romance novel, this is real life. Not everything can be like it is in the books, but this is a book. So I did just find it a little bit strange how kind of self-referential this book is to the romance genre. There were a couple of other things about this book that I didn't love. So I don't love romances where one of the main characters is sexually inexperienced. It's just not that interesting to me. And I did find both of the main characters just a little bit twee, like the kind of stereotypical bookish girl that quotes poetry and the jock that doesn't know anything about poetry but makes an effort because it's important to her. Like I just found that a bit twee for me. But in saying all of that, I feel like I'm maybe being a bit harsh. Like it was a very fun read. They were both hot. If you are someone that does love the romance genre, it is quite fun to kind of be in a book that is like self-referential to the genre. It was very cute, it was entertaining, I had a good time. I also read The Mess We're In by Annie McManus. Now this was one that I had really high hopes for and I honestly just found it a little bit mid. So I think this is set in like the early noughties and it's about a young woman named Orla who is an Irish girl living in London. She's living in Camden of all the places. She's living with a band. She's trying to make it in the music scene herself, but is just really kind of struggling with that. And this is a book that really kind of captures that point in time in that particular area of London and the music scene and like trying to break into the music scene at that time, the kind of partying that was going on, the damaging relationships dynamics that young women found themselves in. It looks at what it was like to be a young Irish person living in London at that time. I do wonder if this is a case of a book that is really good but has come to me at completely the wrong time in my life, because so much of this book is about kind of like finding yourself as a young person, those early years of living in London, trying to figure out London, trying to make it your home, being absolutely broke but partying and trying to make it as a creative. I just feel like that is something that I'm not in that space anymore. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily like falling out of love with London, but it doesn't have the same kind of magic and mystique and fantasy associated with it as it did when like I wanted to live here or when I first moved here. The being irresponsible and financially broke and going to lots of parties, life is over. I am ready for my cozy life. But even going back a few years ago, I didn't hugely find the whole like creatives in Camden life that interesting, and this book is so steeped in that. I feel like I'm not giving this a particularly like fair review because my reaction to this book is very much coloured by my own life experiences. I really do think this book sets out and achieves what it wanted to. Like I do feel like it is a very intimate and accurate portrayal of what that scene was like at that time. So perhaps this was a case of this is a really great book, but just isn't for me where I am in my life right now. In May, I also read We All Begin as Strangers by Harriet Cummings. So this is a small town mystery, and I think it particularly represents that kind of quintessential small English village really well. And in some ways, I think my reaction to this is similar to how I felt about The Mess We Were in that I think the book brilliantly achieves what it set out to in terms of depicting that really kind of specific place in a way that's really recognizable. Like, I think this really captures the way kind of everyone knows everyone in those small English villages, the way gossip can spread really quickly, and this feeling of fear towards outsiders. The central mystery in this book is a person who becomes referred to as the Fox, who is a person breaking into the villagers' homes, but they don't really seem to be doing anything. It seems like they're just kind of showing that they can do it. It's almost voyeuristic. Now, this story is inspired by real life events of someone called the Fox who was breaking into homes and committing a far more serious crime, which I thought was interesting, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. But anyway, the identity of who the Fox is the main mystery running through this book. And I think it's remarkably obvious who that person is. So I didn't particularly find that dominant mystery that interesting or compelling. I suppose what is more interesting is the ensemble of characters that you get to meet and learning more about the intimacies and intricacies of their individual lives and the micro mysteries you have within their personal stories. It quite literally takes that idea of never knowing what is happening behind closed doors, not knowing what is happening behind the front door of your neighbor. So yeah, another one where I feel like there was a really fantastic portrayal of a sense of place, but in terms of the story itself, I felt a little bit mid. Next, I read The Women Could Fly by Megan Giddings. This is an early proof copy, but the finished book has been out for quite a while now. It is a speculative, witchy, feminist kind of book. So this is set in a world where witches are real, and it is also a world where the state mandates that women must be married by the age of 30. Now, our main character Josephine is someone who has felt different her whole life for multiple reasons. Not only is she mixed race and bisexual, but she also has this stigma attached to her around the fact that her mother disappeared when she was a child. So the rumor that surrounds her mother was that she was a witch. Jo is 28, so in terms of getting married in time, the clock is ticking, and because of all of those personal circumstances, there's a lot of suspicion surrounding her. I think it's very easy to compare this novel to the likes of Margaret Atwood. You know, Margaret Atwood often writes novels where kind of the feminist and fantasy and a literary writing style are combined as ways of commentating on real world issues. So I think if you like those elements of Margaret Atwood's writing, you would probably really enjoy this one. It's a book that is showcasing what it is like to be a queer Black woman in a world that is set up for whiteness and heteronormativity. And I think the author does a really intelligent job of showing you those things through a fantasy novel. Like, I would certainly say this is like literary fantasy as opposed to like what I think of as like stereotypical like fantasy. The revelations of finding out more about Josephine's identity and her family was really interesting. And while this wasn't a new favorite book from me, I had this really interesting kind of thought process as I was reading it, because I could certainly recognize how and why it would be the favorite book of so many people. Like, I can just see so many people completely adoring this. I think my enjoyment of the book slightly suffered because I had quite a big gap between reading it. I started reading this on either a flight or a train journey. I think it was a train journey at the very start of the month. Read about half of it and then didn't pick it up again for 2 weeks. So I think my reading experience of it suffered because of that, which is a shame and my fault, nobody else's. I have one children's book, and that was the final book in the Pages & Co series by Anna James. This is The Last Book Wanderer, and this ties up the series wonderfully. So it's obviously hard to talk about a book that is the 5th book in a series, but this is a fantasy middle grade series that is really perfect for the children and adults alike who adore books, that their ultimate coziness is being in books. And that's what this series has been for me. It has been just such a comforting, cozy read. In the first book, we are introduced to Matilda Pages, who lives and works with her grandparents in their bookshop. It is in that first book that Tilly discovers that she has the power to book wander. So characters from her favorite books start to appear to her in the bookshop, and she then discovers that she is able to step into the world within the pages of her favorite books. Now, because of things like copyright, the characters and the stories that we see Tilly and her friends interacting with are all children's stories or fairy tales that are out of copyright. And I just found it really compelling and fun seeing how all the different classical children's literature characters or fairy tale characters were brought to a different kind of life in these novels. We see interactions with Anne of Green Gables, with the Railway Children, and many, many more. And over the course of the series, we learn more about the intricacies of book wandering, but also the dangers posed by those that want to use book wandering improperly. This series is lovely. As I said, it is perfect cozy reading. As someone that has loved reading her whole life, as someone who, even as an adult, continues to adore children's books and classic children's books as well as modern ones, this series has just brought me so much joy. I now have 5 young adult books to talk about. I'm going to start things off with a graphic memoir, and that is Homebody by Theo Parrish. So this is a brilliantly illustrated and told graphic memoir where Theo is sharing their life story with us, sharing elements of their childhood and their adolescence into their adulthood, exploring their understanding of their identity, but particularly their understanding and developing the understanding that they now have of their sexuality and gender identity. And Theo is non-binary. And it was so brilliant to have both a kind of narrative and illustrative depiction of those kind of formative moments that Theo had, the light bulb moments that they had in developing their understanding, the difficult moments or challenging moments that they had. And I think this being a graphic memoir was a particularly fascinating way of seeing that unfold, because yes, their understanding of themselves comes from within, but there is also a physical, visible demonstration of coming to understand who they want to be and who they are. This was brilliant. It was also very funny. And we are in the midst of Pride Month, so I would encourage you to pick this one up if you are looking for something to celebrate trans and non-binary identity in Pride Month. I also read Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. Now, this was my second Emma Lord book. I read Begin Again last year, and I really was not a fan. But I knew this was Emma Lord's most well-known book and her best kind of received book. So this is a romance between Pepper and Jack. Pepper is the swim team captain. She is a big overachiever. And Jack is much more of a class clown and quite a thorn in Pepper's side. Unbeknownst to them, there is not just this high school rivalry between the two of them, but they are also essentially the social media managers for their parents' dueling businesses. So Pepper's family runs this big kind of like fast food chain corporation, and Jack's family owns like a very small family-run local food place, and they get into this like Twitter war. So they have their like IRL interactions, then they are also feuding on social media, and then they are also chatting on this like new social media app that Jack has come up with and created that is spreading around the school. That was kind of chaotic and fun. I did find the rivalry quite entertaining, but I do think this is probably my last Emma Lord book. I do have 2 more of her books on my shelves, but I just feel like I found them so mid that I don't necessarily want to spend more time on them. Like, if this is kind of what is known as her best book, I think the 2 books that I have on my shelves would probably find better homes elsewhere with people that will really love them. I think because this was quite like an unserious book in a lot of ways, but it was actually touching on topics that I think are really, really fascinating, like this kind of the things it was touching on in terms of the kind of big corporation chain versus the local independent business, I think was such a nuanced and interesting topic that this just wasn't the book to fully like delve into the intricacies of that. And I actually found that was the thing that I really wanted to have more of and react to, but this just wasn't that book. I don't know. Has anyone read Emma Lord's books? The two that I have left on my shelves are You Have a Match and When You Get the Chance. Has anyone read those? What did you think of them? Should I read one of those? Let me know what you think. I also read The Crossing by Manjeet Mann, and this is a young adult book that is told in verse, which is one of my favourite methods of storytelling in young adult books. I think particularly when it comes to a very emotionally challenging and difficult topic, verse is a really great way of making that highly charged topic accessible to a younger audience. And this is a novel that is so emotionally important and impactful. It is a book that looks at what it is like to be a refugee. We are following two perspectives. The first of those is Sammy, who is a boy that is fleeing Eritrea to try and find a new life in Europe. And we see the absolutely heartbreaking, heart-wrenching experiences that he goes through on that journey. Not only the emotional and mental difficulties, but the physical danger and the physical difficulty. It is horrendous what Sammy is going through. And the other perspective that we have is a girl of a similar age to Sammy in the UK. Natalie is going through a challenging time in her life, so she has lost her mother, and Natalie is trying to follow in her mother's footsteps in terms of allyship and advocacy for refugees. And I think this book did a brilliant job of showing what people who are in safe places can do to show advocacy and partake in activism for refugees. And I think the dynamic between Natalie and her brother was really interesting. So Natalie's whole family is going through a very difficult time. She leans into the kind of hope and trying to do something that will make a positive difference in the world, whereas her brother finds himself going down a very different path, one that is paved with right-wing ideology and horrible prejudice. And I think the author did a really compelling job of showing how particularly young men can find themselves in those positions. Eventually the paths between Sammy and Natalie do overlap, and that was so beautifully done. It is crafted phenomenally, and the way that the author switches between Sammy and Natalie's perspectives is so clever. The craftsmanship that has gone into this book is just absolutely fantastic, and the emotional punch to the gut that it delivers is just so heartbreaking. I would really highly recommend this. I read Suddenly a Murder by Lauren Munoz. I find books about rich kids being annoying and terrible really entertaining, and that is what this book is. So this follows a group of high schoolers that are coming to the end of high school, and the way that they are celebrating is through a 1920s themed getaway in a glamorous and mysterious place known as Ashwood Manor, and there is a whole bunch of suspicion surrounding this manor. The rich kids are there in their fancy dresses playing this 1920s charade, and it seems like it's all going to be fun and games until Cassidy, who is kind of the main organizer of this event, her boyfriend shows up dead, and all of these sparkling young socialites are now suspects of his murder. And we are mainly following the perspective of Cassidy's best friend Izzy, who brought a knife. Do I think this novel is in any way accurate or true to life, or how these events would actually unfold if they happened in real life? Absolutely not. Was it thoroughly entertaining? Yes, it was. These characters are slightly ridiculous. The revelations at the end are slightly ridiculous. The very convenient and unrealistic way that Izzy manages to have so much information about what's going on is ridiculous. But I thought this was so entertaining. Some books are really thought-provoking and leave you thinking about them for long afterwards. This book is not that. This book is just fun. I have no further thoughts. This book was just vibes. And the final book I'm going to talk to you about today is one that I read for work, and that is Playing the Field by Ivy Bailey. And this is a football romance. Now, I love a sports romance book. I love kind of rivals to lovers, probably more so than I like enemies to lovers. And this is certainly rivals to lovers. It's set in Durham University in Scotland. It follows the star striker of the girls' football team at the university, Sadie, who is so good that she has hopes of being scouted at one of their upcoming games. The men's university team, on the other hand, are not very impressive. They have a new star player who is quite rough around the edges in terms of his technique. His name is Arlo and he has come over from the US, and Sadie is tasked with training with him, trying to improve his game. And there is like rivalry banter between these two from the outset, but they also obviously really fancy each other. I really loved having a sports romance that was not based in the US. This was something that I could kind of recognize as closer to my own university experience, although that was quite a few years ago now. And as someone that loves women's football, it was very fun to see a romance that shone a light on that. So definitely one for the sports romance girlies. And that is it. They are all of the books that I read in May. Do leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought of them. If you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything in particular to say, leave me a football emoji in honor of playing the field. If you want to connect with me, I will swear my Twitter and my Instagram are linked down below in the description. That is it for me today. I hope you're well and I'll speak to you in my next video.